Hey guys, Sandro here from Carcraft Auto Detailing in Melbourne. In a recent video I looked at the various methods I use to maintain and increase the life of my machine-driven polishing pads. And in today's video, I want to cover that final step of washing and drying these somewhat expensive detailing products in order to further maintain their peak performance and increase their longevity. As with most products and techniques used in the detailing sector, there's rarely a single product or technique that can be said to be the best, no matter what aspect of detailing you're looking at, as the best way of doing anything is always dependent on the specific situations you're faced with. So apart from sharing my experiences, likes and dislikes as to what I believe are the best products and techniques in my world, I want these videos to look at a more broad spectrum of the detailing community in various environments with diverse situations, needs and wants. So rather than me trying to shove my opinions down your throat, I'd much prefer to provide you with some credible real-world information based on experience and offer some options that can then let you guys decide what's going to be the best option for you based on things like your environment, your budget, the amount of time you have available, and what your specific needs and wants are. So even though I may be a little biased towards my preferred method of washing my polishing pads, as it does work all round better for me than many of the other methods I've used, I'm not so narrow-minded to think that it's the only way to go about it. And as such, I want to firstly look at a few other methods that I've used or at least tried in the past as possible alternatives that may suit your needs and circumstances better. So first up is the purpose-built pad washer. Now I want to start by saying that these aren't all the same, as I've had another in the past, so to be fair, you can't judge them all on a plain level field. This is the Lake Country System 3000D, and without a doubt the smartest, most versatile pad washer I've owned. What firstly separates this pad washer from many others is its quite ingenious filtration system that actually gives you three options of how you can use it. Firstly, you can still use it as many other pad washers, in that you place your water and cleaning solution in the bucket, and as you clean your pads, the spent solution and residue coming off the pads all mixes together and recirculates, becoming dirtier and less effective with each use, which is honestly something I never particularly liked about pad washers. The second option allows you to place a filter in between the clean water solution and the dirty water travelling back each time you clean the pad, which is a great way to extend the life and effectiveness of the cleaning agent. But the third and truly best option in my opinion allows you to completely separate the clean water solution to the dirty one, with the use of 4 screw-in plugs. So as you clean your pads, the used cleaning solution and residue coming off the pads is stored in a separate reservoir and never mixes with the cleaning liquid. So as far as being the most effective method that doesn't dilute or contaminate the cleaning agent or your pads, it's really the way to go. With anywhere from 6 to 15 litres of water, depending on which filtration option you choose, it's really more than enough cleaning solution to get you through the day and at least a couple of dozen pads. Lake Country also do sell these cleaning solution sachets, which work really great, but a very light dilution of APC will also do the job just fine. The other main difference of the Lake Country pad washer is the actual cleaning plate. Rather than using a slotted plastic guard plate as most do, it uses a very unique design of a rounded stainless steel coated plate with a plastic center fixture which shoots the water out as you press down and provides additional scrubbing power with tiny rounded fingers. All round, this is a much smarter design that actually cleans better and is more gentle on your pads, at least compared to my last pad washer. This comes down to the liquid entering the center of the pad instead of all around it, which makes perfect sense, as once you turn the polisher on, the spinning action forces the liquid to the edges and out of the pad. It also reduces splashing and requires less liquid per pad. And I don't think it's a coincidence that perhaps the most respected name in machine polishing pads has created this washer. Now, I didn't want this to be a Lake Country pad washer review, but as I said, they aren't all the same, and I think it's important that I explain why. But with that said, at about 250 Aussie dollars a unit, though quite a bit less for most of the overseas countries, whether this or any other pad washer is the best option for you is all about your particular situation. The ideal situation of making this investment is for someone who has limited pads and limited time, requiring a quick, effective washing method whilst correcting a car's paint. Or simply for someone who wants an easier, less laboured effort of cleaning their pads, which pad washers do provide. And quite honestly, after spending a whole day machine polishing a vehicle, it's sometimes hard to face a dirty pile of 1 to 2 dozen pads that need to be hand washed. And for that reason alone, letting your polisher do the work for you can be such a relief. But again, honestly, if you're not a professional who is pressed for time or who uses a lot of pads, it really might be a little overkill for your needs. And you could possibly spend this money elsewhere and just wash your pads manually. Secondly, if you are a professional who is pressed for time, you could consider putting that money towards buying enough pads to get you through the day and then once again wash them manually by hand. As far as the quality of the cleaning this pad washer provides, there's no doubting that it does a great and better job than most. Some pads in certain situations may need a second run to get them clean, but that's no different to the other washing techniques that I'll get into in a bit. However, I wouldn't say it's quite as thorough at cleaning pads as my preferred method, and it's not going to work for the smaller 2 and 1 inch pads. But there's no denying that it's much easier and faster. Also, the splash guard flaps are a little too tight for some larger DA polishers, which requires you to leave them open, and investing in a cheap $2 non-slip rubber mat will stop it from moving while in action on your more slippery surfaces and prevent the base and bucket from wearing out on concrete and harder surfaces. I'll lastly add that with the Lake Country pad washer in particular, it's a good idea to add some clean warm water to it at the end and press down a dozen times on the pad plate to give the jets a good clean flush once you're done, as this will prevent any clogging and premature wear of the unit. So just like any piece of equipment, take a little time to look after it and it will return the favour. Next up is a more unconventional method that after having a couple of detailers recommend and swear by it, I did kind of reluctantly decide to give it a go for myself. Basically, it's using your pressure washer to blast the pads and get them clean. So placing a few grit guards into a wash bucket to prevent the water from splashing back up, or even cutting a couple of holes out of an older bucket to create drainage, you start by giving the pads a spray with some APC, place them on the grit guard and pretty much just blast them clean. There's no doubting that it is very effective for the most part, and it's also quite labour free and extremely quick compared to any other method, though you may get a little wet. And you do need to turn the pad over a couple of times, as part of the remaining residue seems to get pushed to the bottom of the pad and not entirely get flushed out the first go. Now I did have an issue with a couple of pads, particularly the Rupes UHS grey pads, that actually seem to get a little distorted, creating small craters on the surface of those stiffer foam pads. But to be fair, I did use this method on a dozen or so other pads with no issues to be seen. Now I can't speak of the long-term effects this method may have on the pads and their Velcro backing, if any, as after using this pressure washer method for a week or so, I kind of decided that it wasn't for me. As apart from the minor mishaps of those couple of pads, it was a bit of a hassle for me to pull out my pressure washer, hook it up and set up the buckets and guards, not to mention that it was usually getting dark outside at the end of the day when I washed my pads. But a main issue for me was that although it was great for larger pads, it really doesn't work too well for the smaller 1, 2 and 3 inch pads, which just get tossed around with the force of the pressure. But again, to be fair, that could be combated with some tweaking to my technique and just more of a personal situation and preference for me. But as I said before, it's not just about saying this is the best technique and you should use it, it's also about what you feel comfortable with and what works well in your world. Perhaps the most common method of all used to clean polishing pads, and a method that I used for quite some time, is this one. I basically started by giving all the pads a good spray with some all-purpose cleaner, and after giving the APC a little time to break down the pad's residue, I'd then take a nylon brush or even a stiffer toothbrush to work the APC over the pad, loosening all the residue. The key thing I found with this method is that it works so much better if the pad was truly saturated in APC, and that the particular brush I used needed to be slightly stiff to get sufficient results, as a soft brush seemed to be far less effective, but not too stiff a brush, as with certain pads I found an overly aggressive brush to pull the pad's wool and microfiber strands off the pads or damage the cells in certain foam pads. Then after giving the pads a good scrub, I'd hold them over some warm running water, and using my thumbs, I'd squeeze and push both the polish residue and APC out of the pad until it rinses clean and runs clear. As with this or any other technique, if I didn't get the pad entirely clean to my liking on the first go, I'd simply repeat the process until I was satisfied. The pros of this method is that you really don't need any special equipment such as a pad washer or pressure washer, which are costly items. And it does in general deliver quite good results and could really be the best option if you're only cleaning a few pads. The cons would be that it is quite labour intensive if you are cleaning upwards of a dozen pads, as you need to accept it's going to take at least a couple of minutes per pad, and the amount of APC you need for a larger amount of pads is also going to add up. Lastly is wear and tear from brushing out the pads, but as I said before, you need to find the right brush that is both gentle and aggressive enough to provide that effective cleaning ability without creating damage. Another technique I used, again for quite some time, which helped a little better at dealing with the more stubborn pads and removing sealant and wax residue a little better, was to place the pads in my wash bucket with my grit guard on top to keep them submerged in a solution of warm water and my microfiber towel laundry detergent. After giving the pads at least a good hour to soak, allowing the warm water and detergent to do its job, I'd use the same technique as the previous method, using my thumbs to squeeze out the residue over some warm running water until the pads ran clean and clear. Now, not all pads are going to be the same in relation to how easy they are to wash, so depending on what compounds polishes you use, plus the actual paint and or clear coat that the pads pull from the car, and the pad itself, whether it's wool, microfiber, foam, and the specific make of those materials, all influence how each particular pad will respond to washing. And you'll also find that new pads are in general easier to wash, as are light polishing pads in comparison to the heavier compounding pads. So my 1 bucket method sometimes became a 2 bucket method that saw the more stubborn pads go in for a second soak after the first wash, to further get them to a much cleaner state, which some did require. And in general, that second soak and rinse out did the job almost every time. I'll also add that you can certainly use a combination of soaking your pads in APC if you feel that the laundry detergent just isn't cutting it. And you can also certainly brush out the pads as well, so that this and the previous method kind of intertwine. The pros and cons of this method I found was that it did an overall better job at cleaning the pads to a higher level, and it was also the least aggressive method that relies more on a pre-soak to do the work rather than scrubbing, pressure washing or using stronger cleaners. And although this process does take a touch more time allowing the pads to soak, the actual labour of rinsing out the pads is quite minimal, as is the wear and tear factor on the pads. So finally, after trialling so many techniques and methods throughout the years, I came to settle on using my soap bar method, which I'll run through and explain why. I gave this method a go a few years ago after starting to use soap to clean some spots off my microfiber cloths, and I just thought to myself, how would it go at actually cleaning my pads? So the actual process itself starts with running warm to hot water over the pad, then after it's saturated within a few seconds, I use my laundry soap bar with just a small stream of running water directly over it, and more or less use the soap bar with a bit of pressure to scrub, loosen and squeeze out the residue from the pad. And apart from a final rinse, that's pretty much it. I know it might sound a little too simple or anticlimactic, especially for me, but that really is it. I think what makes this method so effective and gentle is the fact that the soap bar is constantly creating a combination of lubrication and cleaning action as you run it over the pad, and the slight downward pressure continuously dislodges and flushes the residue off the pad with the aid of the running water. The actual soap I found to work the best is the Velvet Laundry or newer Kohl soap, which are really more or less the same, and it's more about them being a little better at cleaning and not containing the scents and oils of your more personal body soap. And starting at 50 cents for a bar of soap, which can actually clean a good 50 pads or so, it's also by far the cheapest method I've used. Now, as I've said, with all of the techniques, including this one, sometimes you need a second go to get certain more stubborn pads clean. But overall, I've found this technique to be the most gentle, quickest, cheapest and most effective pad washing technique of all. One final slight variation I use with this soap bar method for pads that are just extremely difficult and stubborn to clean is that I use the Sard Wonder soap to give them a good scrub and then set them aside for a half hour or so. Then once the Sard soap has had time to break down the more stubborn residue, I'll basically give the pad another quick scrub and rinse it as I do all the other ones. And so far, there hasn't been a pad that I couldn't get clean with this technique. But as the Sard Wonder soap is a little more expensive than the Velvet or Kohl soap, it's only used for those extremely difficult pads. So lastly is how to get your pads dry. With the pad washers, you give the pads a final spin on a high speed using a polisher to shoot out the majority of the water, but you'll never entirely get it all out. So it really is best to use something like a drying rack to give your pads some time to completely dry after spinning them. You can also use compressed air to blow the pads out further, but again, it's not going to get them bone dry. As with all the other washing techniques, just try and squeeze the pads out as best you can without being too brutal on them, and let them dry overnight on a rack of some sort to provide a quicker drying process. But again, if you want to speed up that process, you can spin them on your polisher and or blow them out with compressed air. So there you have it as far as my pad washing techniques go. There is a couple more methods I have tried, such as using my Tornador air tool, washing machine, and a couple more left field techniques. But overall, the ones I've gone through today are perhaps the better, more suitable, and tested ones I've used. Like I said at the beginning of this video, it's more about what's going to suit you the best in your world, or what you feel comfortable with. But with that said, detailing has always been an ever-evolving thing for me. And although I accept that many of us get used to and comfortable in doing things a certain way, this industry that I love would never progress and evolve if we aren't open-minded to the possibility that there are better methods, techniques and products beyond what we've always used and fit into our comfort zone. So before I decide to judge or advise other people about new and diverse techniques and products, I think it's important that we try them for ourselves and be open-minded to the possibility that there is potentially a better way, as you'll just really never know if a new technique or product is great or bad until it receives the respect of you giving it a real go. I do hope this video was useful to some of you guys out there. Please like, comment and subscribe to show your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.